What's up, YouTube? Welcome to another episode of the Undergrad Forum. As you can see, we got some new surroundings today because today's a special video. We've got another special guest. All right, so today we're going to talk about a topic everyone keeps emailing me about. How do you prevent burnout? How do you stay healthy in med school? How do you stay focused in college? How do you deal with all this stress? I mean, we all know school's busy, MCATs are more competitive, Step 1's harder, everyone's got a higher score. It's more difficult to get into med school. Residencies are more competitive. How do you deal with all this without burning out? I mean, to be frank, I come home some days and I'm like, wow, this is a lot of going on in life. How do we deal with it? How do we stay healthy? More so, how do we have a good strategy so we keep winning and getting what we want in life? So today I got a special guest on with me. I got Dr. Desai, Stanford physician, also one of the chief medical officers at Osmosis, here to talk to us about physician burnout. Desai, are you there?
Yeah, how are you?
Oh, good. How are you doing?
Good.
All right, thanks for coming in with us live from Palo Alto. All right, so I'll let you kind of introduce yourself just to kind of give my audience a chance to know who you are, what you do, and then we'll jump into talking.
Well, I'm a pediatric infectious disease attending at Stanford, and I'm also the chief medical officer at Osmosis. I love medical education. That's kind of why I got mixed up with characters like Mo, and I've been doing it for, like 5-6 years. I used to work at Khan Academy before this, doing Khan Academy medicine. So I've been in this space for a while, and wellness and burnout is huge on the minds of both students, but also patients of mine.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting place to start. And before we talk about our own independent stories and how we cope with it, I mean, you're in a good situation where you actually see younger patients who are in the beginning parts of college or school. Like, what have you seen out there in the clinics about people complaining or having problems with coping or burnout?
About once a week, I see patients, and out of, let's say, 4 or 5 patients, one of those patients, or maybe even 2 sometimes, is a teenager, usually, around 17, 18 years old, kind of applying into college, so kind of pre-college. And they will either tell me about kind of the stress of school and studying, or they'll break down and cry. Mm-hmm. That happens probably like twice a month. And we have kind of a catharsis. And it's really sad, because they're working really hard. They're working their tail off, doing all sorts of stuff, and dealing with all the stresses you just mentioned. And it's just really, really common.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like a paradigm shift, because in the old days, we would say, like, what do kids have to stress about? What do they have to worry about? They don't have families and all this stuff. But now we're kind of realizing that, we put a lot of stress on these kids. It's, going to school is not what it used to be. You just showed up and, like, the wonder years, you'd walk home and play around. Now it's like everyone's focused about getting into a best school, having pedigree. So, do you have any general advice that you give your patients, or where do you even start with these kind of patients?
Yeah, I mean, half the advice is for the patient, half the advice is for the helicopter parents that are kind of, pushing and pushing and pushing. But for the patients themselves, a lot of it is just the fact that I think they feel, like, the one word I always hear, in fact, almost every single time I hear this word, it's overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And that word, it kind of helps you to start piecing together how their mind feels. And if you can kind of introduce a level of organization and say, okay, you're feeling overwhelmed, let's make a list of all the things that are stressing you out. Let's figure out how to organize your life. And time management. It's all about time management, organization. Those are the tools. And anytime you can inject those into the system, things get better.
I think being overwhelmed really is the key. I mean, when I was in college, I was overwhelmed, but my strategy was not better time management. I just worked harder. And that's, essentially what you have to do in the short term when you don't have a better plan or you don't have someone to kind of mentor or guide you. I stayed up till like 3 a.m. in the beginning of college. I was studying every night, and that didn't always correlate with better work, was the irony. You could work harder, but you're just working not smarter, just harder. Med school burnout, physician burnout, or even pre-med or even pre-college burnout in this case, kind of seems to be unanimous. So I think, each of our stories we can share and also just talk about how we deal with it. So for me, when I was in college, that's where it all began. I was kind of overwhelmed in the beginning. I was really excited about being a doctor. I think a lot of people have that good innate energy in them. They're excited. They want to do the right thing. They want to achieve their goals. But they realize they have this huge hill to climb. And the first thing I learned was you got to take it one step at a time. And I know that sounds like really generic, silly stuff. Like, yeah, we've heard that a million times. Just one, a couple steps takes you to the top of Everest. But it really does make a difference, because if all you think about is how am I going to get to the peak of this mountain, or how am I going to become an attending at Stanford, something that a lot of people are going to want, you're going to be overwhelmed every single day. But if you just say, okay, I need to start organizing my life. And what I bought was like a calendar, like a little paper that had like the daily planner. Now we have Google Calendar, so I don't know if people still use paper and pencil. But I would just have my homework in every day, and I'd have like tests coming up or things in red. And I would say I got to take my life essentially 1 week at a time. In Gone in 60 Seconds or in Fast and Furious 1, Vin Diesel says I live my life a minute at a time. But here I'm just saying I took my life 1 week at a time, because realistically, that's all I could handle. I'd say for the next week, what do I need to focus on? What do I have to study? And then I look ahead for the next couple of weeks just to know if there was big items coming up. And that's how I kind of started to handle my overwhelming stress. And I did it by myself, was just taking life 1 week at a time and focusing on immediate objectives.
All that resonates with me. And one funny thing you just said is about Everest, and I tried to climb Everest twice in my life. Yeah. And the first time I got sick and vomited, and the second time, and didn't do it. Okay. And then the second time I actually was able to get to base camp. Okay. But I never thought about that as an analogy to stress and work-life balance, but it is true. It really is. And you literally, like, the mantra in your head, and it's a mantra, it's just like one more step, just get to that point, and that's how you do it. And that's true. That is kind of how, like, how it's been for me in school. One thing that's maybe a little different for me, as compared to you, it sounds like you worked hard. You said you stayed up sometimes, working hard, but not necessarily smart. A piece of me has always been pretty lazy. And I think because that piece has always been lazy, I never really was able to pull all-nighters. In fact, I can remember like a handful of times, maybe like 3 times in med school where I was up all night. Maybe, my body doesn't do that very well. And so I always spent the first week or 2 in school trying to figure out how to strategize around the class. Like, okay, am I going to do a bunch of flashcards? Am I going to do a bunch of questions? Am I going to take a bunch of notes? Like, what am I going to do to get around this class? And each class was kind of like a riddle, and I always tried to do the laziest, easiest thing to navigate that class. And it's been good in the sense that I've kind of figured out, for me, like, different styles work for different classes. Like, it's not like one thing always seems to do the trick. But that was a big part of school for me. It's always 2 parts, like, figure out what I need to do and then do it.
Absolutely.
And that first part, like, figuring out what I need to do, became more and more important, as I went through. It was like, okay, this is a big challenge. How am I going to tackle it? And then, okay, spend the other 8 weeks doing that thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Bill Gates always said that the best people are to hire are the laziest, because they will find the smartest way to get it done, not the hardest working way. But I mean, I think taking that to kind of like at the med school level now of how do we deal with like boards, because that's like the highest rate of burnout we see is, people work really hard in college. Everyone has their strategies, and college overall isn't as hard as med school, so people figure out techniques to get around. And in my case, a lot of brute force helped me in the beginning. I mean, in your case, you were smart enough to have strategy in the beginning, which just kind of helped you out through. But when it comes to boards, I mean, the question always is, how do people handle step 1? That's like because once you get through step 1 and you figure it out, step 2 and I'm doing step 3 now. It's you figure out a technique. So for step 1, I mean, I think some of the key questions people always have is, where do I start? How do I have a plan? And how do I prevent burnout? Because I feel like now is February going into March. It's when people are going to start buckling down for step 1. And I'm sure most kids around the nation are probably slightly afraid or kind of worried, like, what am I going to do? Should I restart learning everything I learned in med school? Now comes that key word. They probably feel overwhelmed. So what would you say kids can probably do to start right now in med school?
I mean, this is why Osmosis has a step 1 scheduling tool. I mean, the whole idea is that we know there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of resources out there. And the idea isn't for us to put out one more resource to kind of be part of the cacophony of noise, right? Like, we already know people use certain things, and they want to be able to figure out how to organize those things. It's Tuesday. Do I study this? Do I go to do I do a test? What am I doing on Friday and Saturday? when am I going to have some time to go and watch a movie? And trying to figure out how to schedule all that stuff. And you're right, Google Calendar is like, what a lot of people actually default to is Google Calendar. Like, all right, let's put it in my calendar. And I think that works, you know. For a lot of people, that works. What we try to do is essentially do the same thing, but actually have you, you know, tie in all your resources. And it's basically just allowing students, you know, a chance to use our scheduling tool to kind of not feel overwhelmed and to be able to take a step back and say, okay, what does my 60-day plan look like? Right. And if you can see it, then you can do it. You know, it's the same thing in life. You can imagine it, you can become it. So that's a big part of it. And then, you know, there's the other stuff. There's, you know, the general organization of the you know, platform itself. The idea is to train people for 2 years how to organize their studying. So by the time they get to step one, it's not a brand new thing that you have to like look how to organize, that you've been doing it for 2 years. And it's ironic too. It's like step one, step two, step three, as you said. They basically get less and less relevant for residency. As you're kind of getting used to it, it also starts mattering less and less, which is really unfortunate because that means that step one is the one that people are most unprepared for and also matters the most.
But I mean, I think the thing about step one is a key stress is going to be being overwhelmed. But like the thought I always have is, well, maybe not all the people had osmosis for 2 years, or most people are probably just showing up and saying, wow, step one's in a couple months, what do I do? And I think that's probably the majority of medical students who, you know, I'll be frank, I was one of those med students. I was like studying hard, going along the first 2 years, and I was like, okay, you know, time to get serious about step one, I guess. What do I do? And really, I think the key is for step one, you have a luxury in that, like, it's basic science time of med school. You're not busy with like wards. You're not seeing patients in residency for step three. So, and most schools give you some amount of protected time. So I think that's nice. But for step two, then you have like this new variable, which is most people take it during their third year of med school. So you have to learn how to time it in between rotations. And then for step three, you have what I would call, even though step three we say is the easiest and it matters the least, I actually would argue it's the worst to study for, or the hardest to study for, because you're in the middle of residency and you just have to find little pockets of time. So that really tests your ability to time manage. And I'm going to kind of work backwards and say how I studied for step three is how I think you could just take it for step one, but just take the gold out of it. And I literally did what you said. I had like a 60-day plan. And I printed my Google Calendar out, and I had like 2 calendars there. And I knew how many hours it took me to do a block on UWorld. I knew how long it took me to review it, and I just put all the hours in for all the blocks until all of UWorld was done. And ironically, like in the beginning of residency, I was like terrified about how I'm going to do step three. But then once I put the 60 days out on a calendar, I was like, oh, this is doable now. And I think that's the key. Once I saw it was doable, my stress level just dropped, and I went from like losing my hair more than I already have to like smiling and having a good time. I think that's like the number one key. Having a schedule and knowing that your schedule is already planned takes away that 24/7 anxiety of I should be studying.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right. Once you step back and you can look at the whole plan, it does make it much more comfortable. I would also remind your viewers that they should make sure that they cook into the plan time off. You know, like a big part of why people stress out is they feel overwhelmed. If you do feel like it's a complete plan for your life, not just a plan for studying, you can actually take it and be like, all right, here, I know I need like a break day. That's this Sunday, and I can work towards that and kind of put those right into the plan. I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. I totally forgot to mention that. So I like watching movies. I think Netflix is fantastic. I would schedule in every evening to have about 30 minutes of movie time. And I know that's not like you're not going to watch a lot of a movie in 30 minutes, but over a week you get to watch 1 or 2 movies at least. And I think that kind of makes you feel normal, because when you get up, for step one, I got up, I studied, I did first aid, I did UWorld, I did like my little video sets, and I did nothing else. It was miserable. I had the worst time of my life. But, you know, for step two, and then again for step three, like every night I'm watching movies, I'm like eating normal food, making yourself feel normal. And, you know, you have goals every night to kind of look forward to at the light at the end of the tunnel. Kind of makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And those little treats can be, you know, parts of like how you eat, you know, like, hey, I love to eat blah, blah, blah. That's going to be Thursday night's dinner. Tuesday for lunch, I'm doing this. But like making all those decisions, you know, in a given day, I think we can make, you know, let's say 20 good decisions, right? When you get to your 21st decision, you're not making good decisions.
No.
So kind of identifying how many decision points there are and then minimizing it to just the major ones makes your life less stressful as well. So you can say, look, for the next 60 days, I don't have to think about, what I'm eating. I don't have to think about this. I don't have to think about that because my freezer is full. And I already know I'm going to kind of go and get meals from my parents or my significant other. So just kind of figuring those parts out is huge too.
And I think that's the key, because a lot of people make the big mistake of, I need to sit and just study, study, study. And then you start to feel crappy and you're like, man, when's this going to end? You're not happy. But if you know you have little breaks coming up, like that's the first thing I teach people when they come to me for like, hey, how do you study? When I tell them you have programmed breaks, it like changes their life. And so I would argue, if you have things like that we know, everyone knows breaks work. Don't think because it's step one season, you're going to forego your breaks. No, this is when you need to keep all your rituals the most. Don't start reinventing the wheel now. And I absolutely love, I think this is like the biggest concept we're probably talking about today, is having everything scheduled makes such a big difference. I kind of can feel that in my chest, like when I have it properly scheduled or not. And that kind of comes with time. Because if you're kind of going with the whim and like, oh yeah, I got to do these today and I got to study and I got to go pick up my laundry, that's too much for you to juggle. But even if you, like Dr. Desai said, if you just have it on paper when you're going to be doing things, it's not in your mind and you just follow the regimen, it's like doing a checklist. You're going to feel totally good about it. So I think that core concept, however you decide to plan to schedule your day, plan it. Like be very military, be strict, and then like that feeling will be off your chest and you'll be able to focus a lot better.
There's also, I think, moments, and I just want to mention this briefly, when people do kind of spin out of control. And they're basically, it's like 1 p.m., they're like, F it, I'm not doing anything the rest of the day.
Yeah, I know that one.
And they're like going off and like eating ice cream and going to the museum and, whatever. And by nightfall, they're feeling pretty shitty, pretty terrible. I'm not sure if I can say that.
No one cares. You can say whatever language you want.
So they're feeling pretty bad, right? And guilty.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful. And what's important there is to say, like, okay, well, tomorrow's a new day. Are they going to wake up feeling guilty and terrible and then screw another day or burn another day? And then it's kind of really cycle out of control? Look, that was Tuesday or that was Wednesday. Tomorrow's a new day. And I think just make sure that they have the mental fortitude to say, look, I forgive myself for doing whatever it is that I feel bad about doing, but I'm going to march ahead, and tomorrow's a new day and we're going to start again. I think that's also important, because I've had moments when I've had a great schedule and I just didn't use it.
Yeah.
And then there's that whole guilt cycle that kind of spins out of control. And as long as you can kind of rein that in, I think then you can kind of get right back into it and be like, you know what, I'm human. I had a fun day. I'll remember it. But tomorrow I got to.
I will be the first to admit I have had those kind of days. I actually remember a very specific day during step one time where I lost it. I was in the middle of it. And I went to Togo's and I got a hot pastrami sandwich. And I don't know why. I needed it, and I took the rest of the day just like sitting around the park, just doing nothing. I just stared off into space. But I love that concept of like each day is 24 hours. And you don't pull the next day into the next one. Like have a full reset in between. Because if you think about it, like the hours you sleep every night, you can't say, well, I slept 3 hours the night before, then I slept 12. So if you summate, no, every day is different. You don't get to make up for it the next day, really. So just like for sleep, that's a concept I think everyone understands. Do it the same with your academic schedule. That is so brilliant. If I could give them a gold star for that, we would. That is like a pearl that we can all take. Every day is a reset day. We talked about it a lot today. Med student burnout, and I think some highlights really were the very first key. And ironically, this is what they also teach in business school when it comes to finance. People who have a financial plan tend to do better. So if you have a strict plan for your studying, you're obviously going to do better. You're not guessing. Take the analogy of spending in for your money for finance. How much money do I have in my account? Also do the same thing for studying. You're not guessing how much you're going to study. You're going to have it mapped out. So whether you're in the pre-college years, in the midst of the college, going to med school, or even in residencies, trying to schedule step 3, knowing exactly what you're doing every day and scheduling it out takes away all that anxiety, takes away all that wasted mental energy and dwindling away. Take each day at a time. If you did well today, great. Use that as a reinforcement to doing well tomorrow. If you didn't do so well, give yourself, the reality that we're human. We all make errors. Reset the day. Start off strong the next. Build in a little bit of gifts for yourself, or little treats, whether it's watching movies at the end of the day, going and seeing your friends on Sunday, eating foods that you like. Realistically, no one's a machine. I thought I was, and I was wrong. I cannot just plunder through life and just study 24/7. You're human. You have to stay happy. And also, try to realize that you're lucky to be in school. You're lucky to be studying what you want. It could be a lot worse. Sometimes we get caught up in it and how unfair life is and it's hard, but ultimately you're achieving your dreams. Realize you're taking one step at a time to get to the summit of what you want in life. And realistically, in sum, if you take all these things together, hopefully it'll reduce your burnout, and hopefully it'll make you just do better in school as well. I want to go ahead and thank our special guest, Dr. Desai from Stanford, pediatric infectious disease specialist, coming in live from Palo Alto, talking to us about student burnout and overall health wellness. Thank you, Dr. Desai.
Thanks, Mo.
All right. Thanks, guys, again for watching. Any questions or comments down below in the comment section. Follow us on Facebook. For the Osmosis channel, you'll find a lot more of these videos on their Osmosis support channel, also linked down below. If you have any questions, always, guys, go ahead and feel free to send me an email. And as always, enjoy your studies.